Well, if you're going on or moving on from the last video that I just did about Freud, the movie I was trying to think of, I was having a tip of the tongue experience, is Inception. And Inception has an interesting theory behind it, or that is very Freudian, actually. And if you listen to it, you'll see examples of it throughout. Even the watery shores evokes the iceberg analogy. In terms of theory of dreams that are espoused in it itself. So let's turn our attention real quickly here. I already mentioned about the id, the structure of the mind, and the id is driven along by the pleasure principle. It is all about immediate gratification. It is found in basically the child's heart. That's all they want, when they want it, how they want it, at what time they want it. It is all about immediate gratification, and when they don't get it, then they throw a fit, and you generally know what they want by the cries and the protestations, the gratification that goes on. The second thing is the ego, and the ego is essentially, it functions on the reality principle. It is the growing personality that is interacting with the world around it. It realizes that I can't have something immediately, and therefore I have to make some negotiations and compromises with it. It talks about delayed gratification. And it makes, like I said, the accommodations to the world as it is, not as it should be, which is often part of the id. And then finally, the superego, which is more of the moral compass. And it is, from Freud's perspective, he was quite ambivalent, if not antagonistic, about religion. And he believed that these two kids talk about, is that once we have these sexual impulses, then we'll have to hide them. Well, he had a very stereotypical view of Christianity, of religion in general. He was an Austrian Jew, and he believed that in many ways religion was a stifling influence on people's personality. So the executive has to, the ego as the executive has to deal with the strivings of these two component parts of the person's personality. The superego makes all the moral demands. The id demands its gratification immediately, and the ego has to figure out a way to reconcile the two. Now, the other component part that's really fascinating is that Freud, in a lot of ways, was probably the first developmental theorist. He entered the psych world talking about development, and he was really probably one of the first. So he proposed the psychosexual stages that are included in his theory. It served his theory without a doubt. So basically, through age 0 through 6 was the key stages or the key developmental stages in his mind that harnessed the pleasure-seeking energies of the id and began to become more and more socialized. So from 0 to about 18 months, in Freud's way of thinking, you had what he referred to as the oral stage. Most needs are focused around the mouth. Certainly breastfeeding or feeding is, and then all the other elements around that. The anal stage, 18 to 36 months. So now we're at a year and a half to 3 years. And during this particular phase, the pleasure centers, well, not necessarily centers, but the development centers around the bowel and bladder elimination, and potty training occurs on bowel and bladder development, if you want to put it that way, and a lot of power struggles erupt around this. That Freud seemed to make a big deal out of in this struggle to gain control over one's body. So 18 to 36, 3 to 6 years of age, 6 years, we are now in what he refers to as the phallic stage. This, in his way of thinking, the pleasure centers around the genitals. Boys experience during this period of time the Oedipus complex, which in Freud's way of thinking, the boy sees the father as a rival, and these are all unconscious in terms of sexual desires pointed toward mom, with this developing sense of self. So, and therefore dad is a rival, and because he can't overcome him, then instead he incorporates or engages in what Freud referred to as identification, which leads to then gender identity as a little boy. From 6 years on, we have the last stage, which 6 years to, I'm sorry, not 6 years on, but 6 years to puberty. We have a latency stage where most things are pretty quiet. It's that's why we call it a latency. One of the things that I have used in past concepts or understanding of this is that this latency stage seems to be a consolidation of all the things that often are learned during this time. 3 to 6 years of age from Freud's way of thinking is this Oedipus complex, but 3 to 6 years of age is also a time of learning about relationships. And so 6 to puberty, to puberty itself, then is this latency stage, and then 6 years, or I should say puberty and beyond, what you have and beyond is what happens during this point in time, is really sexual interests mature, other relationships mature, and that's really as far as Freud actually took it. The one other concept that's key to understand here is, in terms of this development, is something that he referred to as fixation. And fixation is kind of a halting of development in one particular stage or another. So, for example, if somebody were fixated at the oral stage and didn't develop very well for whatever reason, there are a variety of things that can interfere, then you might see excessive eating or drinking as in later in life as a signal that the person never got beyond the oral stage, drinking. And that's one, like I said, it's one of the key concepts in understanding Freud's look at developmental stages, and that's really part of what made Freud quite remarkable. I think in a lot of ways Freud has gotten a bad rap. He was really the first to articulate an understanding of the human mind. Now, whether it was flawed or not is another matter, but he actually systematized our understanding of how we look at life and the inner life of the human being, and in that regard he was quite significant. There are lots of things about Freud that, like I said, he's taken quite a bad rap from. But the one thing that I would point out to you is his thoughts about human nature. And the way he saw human nature is actually quite consistent with the Christian worldview, because he saw man as basically evil. And in a lot of ways, he agreed with the Christian worldview in the sense that man is born sinful and desperately wicked. Those are the terms that the prophet Jeremiah uses. And Freud was agreeing with that. He basically was a witness to man's inhumanity to man. He died in 1939, so he saw the beginnings of the National Socialist Party in Germany, otherwise known as Nazism. And so he watched it up close, and it had a direct impact on his particular theory.